check out our streaming schedule for this week. We've got tons of content in terms of the NFL and college football, as we're going live just about every single day this week. So make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single moment where we go live. And now, on with our feature presentation.
A lot of people have floated the idea before of having higher seeds in the playoffs be able to pick their opponent. In other words, scrap the seeding for the lower sides. The higher placed teams should be able to decide who they want to play in the postseason. As an example, let's say in the wildcard round that the number 2 seed is set to face the number 7 seed. The problem for the number 2 seed is that even though they've only lost 3 games all season, 2 of them came at the hands of the number 7 seed, and that divisional team has their number. Meanwhile, the number 6 seed was a team that they thoroughly destroyed by 35 points the last time out, and is a team decimated with injuries. The number 2 seed should be able to pick their opponent and have the ability to play the number 6 seed instead of being forced to play the number 7 seed. This format has been floated around for a while, but has never gained any significant traction, partly because it would be a scheduling nightmare, partly because it would make things extremely confusing, and partly because it would defeat the entire purpose of seeding in the eyes of some. But that is an interesting concept to say the least. What if you got to pick your playoff opponent? What if you actually got to choose who you wanted to play in the playoffs? And speaking of interesting concepts, if you like learning more about interesting concepts that have happened throughout NFL history, as well as other interesting things to happen throughout the sport, then this is the place for you, because we talk about all things NFL history all the time with a new video and a new live stream every single day, bringing you information that you might not have known before. So if you like that sort of stuff, make sure to hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. Thanks in advance for your support as we try and hit 70,000 subscribers. Well, I bring that up because with the team you've been watching this whole time, that's exactly what happened. This team is the 1983 Dallas Cowboys, and they enter the final week of the season with one of the most bizarre scenarios you'll ever see in the playoffs. Not only could they get to choose their opponent without any punishment whatsoever, but in many ways, people were hoping that the Cowboys would lose so they would get an easier draw. Lose the battle, but win the war, if you will. And more than 40 years later, we're going to break it down today, because it is a truly bizarre story that needs to be relived. Because this is the story behind the 1983 Dallas Cowboys, and one of the most bizarre playoff scenarios in NFL history that you have never heard of. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, we need some context to understand just how good the Cowboys were in 1983, and what they were playing for entering the final week of the season. With 1 week to go in 1983, the Cowboys were looking like one of the best teams in all of football, sitting at 12-3. And they were going to be in the playoffs for the 9th straight season and have a winning record for the 18th straight season. They had the second best offense in football, scoring 462 points, or an average of well over 30 points per game. And their point differential of plus 144 was the second highest in football. Led by a slew of Pro Bowlers and All-Pros and future Hall of Famers, like Tony Dorsett on the offensive side and Randy White on the defensive side, the Cowboys were once again looking like a dominant outlet, and were one of the favorites to make it to the NFC Championship for the 4th straight season. We knew right away that this team was going to be good, seeing as they started 7-0, and they didn't exactly slow down entering the final week of the season. However, there was one small problem that you might have been able to figure out by now. Remember how I said that they were second in a lot of categories, being second in offense and second in point differential and all that? Well, the team ahead of them happened to be in their own division, this team right here, as Washington, the defending Super Bowl champions, was looking even better than they did the previous year. Through 15 weeks, Washington was 13-2, putting together one of the best offenses in NFL history by averaging 34 points per game, and boasting a point differential of plus 200. Starting quarterback Joe Theismann was the MVP of the league. John Riggins was dominant by the goal line, punching it in a then record 24 times, which, keep in mind, no one else in NFL history had even eclipsed 20 rushing touchdowns by that point. And thanks to a dominant defense that recorded 51 sacks and picked off a league-best 34 passes, Washington was relegating Dallas to second fiddle in the division. And sure enough, when the final week of the season rolled around and Washington defeated the New York Giants 31-22 in a nationally televised Saturday game, Washington clinched the NFC East with a 14-2 record. Dallas knew their fate entering the final week of the season. They were going to be a wild card, and they would have to be playing on wild card weekend thanks to Washington's dominance. Having said that, this wasn't necessarily a bad thing for this team right here in the Dallas Cowboys. Yes, being a wild card and not getting a bye week is a bummer, but the Cowboys were the second best team in the NFC by virtue of their record, and no one could catch them. Even if the Cowboys lost their final game, they'd be 12-4. Entering the final week of the season, there was only one other team in the NFC with more than 8 wins, and that was the San Francisco 49ers at 9 wins. This meant that the Cowboys were locked into their seed. They were locked into the number 4 seed in a 5-team playoff format, where the division winners automatically got a bye, and the 2 wildcards squared off at the higher seed stadium. So they knew their fate. They just didn't know who they were going to play. But in a weird sort of way, they actually did know who they were going to play because they got to choose. The Cowboys played on Monday Night Football against the San Francisco 49ers. Back then, they played Monday Night Football games during the final week of the season. So the Cowboys needed 2 things to happen on Sunday for one of the most bizarre playoff scenarios of all time to unfold. Number 1, the Detroit Lions needed to beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. If the Lions won, they would win the NFC Central, and they would be locked into the number 3 seed. Should be easy, right? The Buccaneers were 2-13. They were the worst team in football, and the game was being held in Detroit, with the Lions having won 3 of their last 4 and 5 of their last 6. The Lions were heavy 10-point favorites, so this should be a win for Detroit to get them the NFC Central and at least let half of the chaos unfold. And while it wasn't easy by any means, the Lions did end up winning the game, taking it by a final score of 23-20 thanks to a strong run defense that held the Bucs to just 44 yards rushing and under 2 yards a carry, and thanks to a strong outing by Billy Sims, the incredible Lions back who had over 130 yards from scrimmage. The win gave the Lions the NFC Central crown, sent them to the playoffs, and kept the chaos scenario alive. And number 2, the Los Angeles Rams needed to defeat the New Orleans Saints. This was a win-and-in, lose-and-you're-out game in what was the biggest game in Saints history at the time. Both teams entered the game at 8-7, so this was a de facto playoff game. And in what was, at the time, the most heartbreaking loss for the New Orleans Saints of the Superdome to the Los Angeles Rams, and I can't think of any other time it happened in the last 40 years, the Saints lost the game by a final score of 26-24, losing on a walk-off field goal by Mike Lansford from 42 yards out. This game was absolutely chaotic and featured an interesting decision by Bum Philip Slate with regards to a long field goal attempt by Morton Anderson that I'll definitely touch on at some point in a future video. But despite the Rams only having the ball for 22 minutes and accruing 11 first downs, the Rams were able to get it done. And in John Robinson's first year as head coach, were able to go from one of the worst teams in football the year before to a playoff team. Heck of a turnaround by the former USC coach. So the Lions took care of business, and the Rams went on the road, and they took care of business. And this meant that entering Monday night, as in this game right here, the NFL standings look like this. Notice anything a bit odd? That's right, there are 2 teams that have yet to play their 16th and final game, because they play on Monday Night Football. And those 2 teams were the Dallas Cowboys, and oddly enough, the San Francisco 49ers. And what made this interesting is the fact that the 49ers were 9-6, but with a loss, would lose the tiebreaker to the Rams. The 49ers and Rams split the season series against each other, with the Rams winning in Week 6 by a score of 10-7, and the Niners winning in Week 8 by a score of 45-35. When it came to the second tiebreaker, which is division record, the Rams held the edge. The Rams swept the Atlanta Falcons and the New Orleans Saints, giving them a 5-1 division record, while the 49ers, despite sweeping the Saints, lost 28-24 to the Atlanta Falcons back in Week 12, and could only split this season's series against them. Granted, there is a giant asterisk next to that game because that was the famous Billy White Shoes Johnson walk-off Hail Mary game where he was short, but they ruled it a touchdown anyways. But still, a loss is a loss. And because the Rams had a 5-1 division record and the 49ers only had a 4-2 division record, if the 49ers and Rams were tied in the standings, the Rams would be in first place. And the other team, the 49ers, would get the wild card. And you might be able to see where this one is going. The Cowboys are locked into the number 4 seed, and they'll get to play the other wild card in the wild card round. If the 49ers win, they'll be 10-6, they'll win the division, and the 9-7 Rams will be the wild card. If the 49ers lose, they'll be 9-7, the Rams will win the division, and the 49ers will be the wild card. So during this game right here, the Cowboys got to decide who they wanted to play next week in the playoffs risk-free. Win this game, and you get to play the 49ers for the second straight week. Lose this game, and you play the Rams. You get to pick your opponent, and nothing changes on your end. And there's no other hypothetical scenarios in the work. This was, quite literally, a choose-your-fighter game, the likes of which we might never see again. And many people who were associated with the Cowboys wanted the Cowboys to lose this game against the 49ers so that they would play the Rams in the wildcard round, giving them an easier draw than playing the 49ers. The last time the two teams met, let's just say it didn't go over that well. Actually, the last 2 times they met, it didn't go over well. When the teams met in the 1981 regular season, the Niners dominated, as the Cowboys had no answers for the future Hall of Fame defensive lineman Fred Dean, with the Niners winning that game 45-14. And then, the two teams met in the NFC Championship, which resulted in one of the most iconic plays in NFL history, the catch, which sent the 49ers to the Super Bowl. Not that anyone had answers for Joe Montana back then, but seeing as he threw 5 touchdown passes and 565 yards across the last 2 meetings, and his team went 2-0, the Niners were going to be a tough out. Plus, to play a team in back-to-back weeks, that can be super tough. The Rams, though, well, whereas the Niners enter the final week of the season with a point differential of plus 114, the Rams enter with a point differential of plus 15, as in nearly 100 full points worse than the Niners. The Rams had a worse offense and a worse defense. In fact, they were near the middle of the pack in a lot of categories, compared to the 49ers, who were a top 5 team in football in many categories. Instead of playing Joe Montana, you get to play Vince Ferragamo, a quarterback who is significantly worse and threw more picks than touchdowns on the season. Instead of playing a team you lost your last 2 games against, you play a team that you won your last 2 games against. Instead of playing a team that would enter the playoffs on a 3-game winning streak, you play a team entering the playoffs having lost 2 of its last 3, 3 of its last 5, and 5 of its last 9, playing below 500 ball in that stretch. Outside of rookie running back Eric Dickerson, who was sensational, there was, at least on paper, nothing about the Rams that was scary, especially when compared to the 49ers. And this led to a bizarre scenario where many Cowboy fans, during this game right here, were rooting for their team to lose. Lose, and have a better chance of advancing to the playoffs because you get to play the Rams and not the 49ers. Lose, and at least right now, the 49ers can't break your heart. Said Cowboys president Tech Schramm on the scenario, I don't think it makes a hoot and holler's worth of difference to our team who we would play in the wildcard game. But I'm sure we'll approach the Monday night game the way we approach any game. However, he also admitted that he had no idea that a scenario like this was even possible, and had no idea that due to the parity of the NFC outside of Washington and Dallas, and due to the weird scheduling coincidences, that the Cowboys could even be in a position like this, or any team could be in a position like this for that matter, to actually choose their opponent. Now, the bad news for Cowboy fans was that, as you could probably tell, they lost this game right here. The good news, though, was that the Cowboys lost this game. In fact, this game wasn't even remotely close, as the Niners won it by a final score of 42-17, thrashing the Cowboys at Candlestick Park to win the NFC West crown with a 10-6 record, winning it for the second time in the last 3 seasons. The Cowboys turned it over 5 times. Joe Montana had another incredible day at the office, throwing for 4 touchdowns and proving to be the thorn in the Cowboys' side once again. And Dallas had no answers for the sensational play of running back Roger Craig, who should absolutely be a Hall of Famer, as Craig had over 5 yards per carry while also scoring 2 receiving touchdowns. The Cowboys got nothing going on the ground, with Tony Dorsett having just 32 yards rushing on 2 yards per carry. The Niners' defensive line feasted by sacking Danny White 3 times before he got pulled from the game late. And the Cowboys never led or even tied at any point, as after the Niners took a 14-0 lead midway through the first quarter, the game never got within 1 possession. You knew who was winning this one from the onset. But while the result wasn't fun to watch, a lot of Cowboy fans and faithful got their wish. They didn't have to face the much stronger Niners in the playoffs. They got to play the Rams. Task failed successfully. Now, the irony in all of this when it came to this team behind me right here is that even though the Cowboys played the Rams in the wildcard round, and on paper, the Rams were a much easier draw than the 49ers, the Cowboys ended up losing that game, losing it by a final score of 24-17, having ended the season on a 3-game losing streak. Oddly enough, I've talked about that game in the past, so if you want to learn more about that, you can do so by clicking the card in the upper right corner. I don't think it would have mattered whether the Cowboys played the 49ers or the Rams in the playoffs, because this was a team that was cratering at the worst possible time. You want to play your best football toward the end of the season, and the Cowboys were playing their absolute worst. So whether they play the Niners or the Rams, the outcome probably would have been the same: a wild card round exit. Are we ever going to see another scenario like this? Well, I'd be highly surprised. With more teams in the playoffs now, with flex scheduling making it so that games can be moved around so one team doesn't know their outcome beforehand, and with the final week of the season being nothing but divisional games, the odds that we ever get a situation like this one, where a team can pick its opponent, and where a team actually has incentive to lose a game to get an easier draw, are very slim. Having said that, it was one of the weird parts about the NFL back in 1983, because a scenario like this was not only very much possible, but it actually happened. Because in 1983, many people thought that the best way for the Cowboys to win was for them to lose.
Be sure to like and subscribe if you have not done so already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and check out my other channels, JG8 for the history of college football, JG7 for the history of baseball, and JG9 News, where we talk about all things happening in the NFL. Join me every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, where we'll play live NFL trivia for cash prizes. And make sure to join me live, as we're on stream just about every single day. And thanks to all our Patreon members and our YouTube members for helping out the channel. See how you become a member and show your support financially in the description down below.